So, welcome everyone to Love, Sex, and Leadership. I'm here with my dear friend Elizabeth Willis and be talking about education and her new book and intimacy and all the things that we like to wrap our minds around. Very excited to have you here on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a long time coming. I'm so happy
Yes,
that we're
yes.
finally connecting.
For sure. So, yeah, Elizabeth is a keynote speaker. She has a PhD in curriculum and instruction. She's been working with the Montessori school for many years. Just came out with a new best-selling book called The Initiated Teacher: Reawakening the Soul of the Montessori Education and the New Paradigm. She's also was managing a big kind of sexuality and intimacy school for many years, and yeah, we've known each other for quite a while, and have spent some time together in Miami area where she is. I think she's in Illinois right now, but yeah, very excited to have her here.
Thank you,
So
Aaron.
yeah, I'd love if you want to just share. Obviously, this is a new exciting book that you brought out into the world, and it feels like kind of a weaving of some of um, the things that you've been obviously studying and deeply merged into as a child educator for many years. What was sort of the biggest inspiration for bringing this work into the world? Like, what was that driving why that helped you kind of birth this into creation?
Yeah, well, I would say the pinnacle and the point where the concept of the book came through was about a year before I wrote the book, and it was May, which is the end of the school year. And the end of the school year for teachers is really a very exhausting on many different levels time in the school year that goes in America from September to the beginning of June. And I witnessed a coworker of mine, and she was really distraught and just had a tremendous amount of anxiety around communication with a parent. And this parent was challenged with their child in the fact that their child wasn't showing up in the way that they projected their child should show up in the academic and emotional way. And this is a common piece that often, this dynamic often happens in education and with teachers, where there's a tremendous amount of pressure placed upon parents. Especially my expertise comes from America because that's where I live and work in Miami, Florida, and most of my work with teachers is in Miami and around the rest of the United States. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on American parents for their children to produce and for their children to be all that they can be. And this pressure trickles down to the teachers. And really, what it is it's a projection of what their child is not. And it's a reflection on the parent of, what their child is actually showing them, and what their child is actually, who their child actually is. But that discrepancy between the parent's projection of what they want their child to be and what the child actually is a hard piece for parents to digest. And that projection usually lands on the teacher. And it looks like for the teacher, you didn't teach my child this, you never told me about this, and this. And it comes as an attack towards teachers. And I'm getting goosebumps as I share this because this is a very real reality in the life of a teacher.
Hmm.
And teaching has become, again in America, and I'm sure there's similarities around the world, teaching has become, this monstrosity of a package to carry
Hmm.
in the sense of responsibility of what we are here to steward. And so
Hmm.
it was in that moment that I saw what was happening with this teacher as she was, sitting in the anxiety of questioning herself, because teachers are most most of us are empaths. We're in the service industry, and we come in with, people pleasing, a tremendous amount of empathy, and not a lot of boundaries are taught. And, I could see her wrestling with, is this me? Did I do the right thing? Did I not tell the parent about this? Did I not teach the child well enough, right? And so, it's then internalized and it becomes anxiety upon the teacher. And so what I recognized as I saw this was, the work that I've done in sexuality and transformational work, and the way that, in transformation we kind of were unable, and in psychology as well, we're able to kind of see these different patterns, that there was in fact like a merging of these two, and there was a tremendous amount of information that I held from my experience in sexuality, from my experience in transformational work, that could support teachers. And so that was really the emergence of the book.
No, I love that. So what I hear is really a place to support teachers in how often maybe their boundaries might be being crossed and they're not actually standing for what they're here to bring, because they have kind of over exaggerated parents that are quite intense and pushing a lot of the blame and shame that the parents haven't processed themselves onto the teacher, as a place of not taking responsibility for what their child is kind of emerging into the world as.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, the boundaries in the book, this is the book, The Initiated Teacher.
Hmm.
And there's
Beautiful.
a story about the cover. It's actually, I wrote it towards Montessori teachers because that's been my work. I've been in the classroom for 25 years. I am an educator. I teach first, second, and third grade in the Montessori classroom.
Mhm.
Um, but the book actually is styled after Maria Montessori's first edition of her Montessori method, which was published over 100 years ago.
Wow.
And then these three little stars have to do with Montessori's, what she calls the triad, the Montessori triad, which is the teacher, the environment, and the teacher, the environment, and the class, and the child. So those are those
Mm,
three. Um, which spiritually, that triad, can cross over, into esoterics and everything else. So there was
mhm, mhm,
a blend there. Anyway, to go back to what you were saying, yes to the boundaries piece. And because I've done so much work, I also work with teachers, and I work at the local university teaching teachers. And and I did my dissertation on teacher education, and one of the gaps and the discrepancies that I see is that there's a tremendous amount of, when we're training teachers, there's a tremendous load on method,
mhm,
what to teach, and how to, manage the classroom. And
mhm,
there's zero on the teacher themselves, and
mhm,
how the
mhm,
teacher is to carry this load, and how the
mm,
teacher is to manage. And it's so lopsided because it's so focused on production, it's so focused on content, it's so focused on method, and the teacher themselves is kind of sitting over here completely undernourished and not
mm,
even seen.
mhm,
And
mhm,
that's the niche that this book fits into. There's this new concept in teaching called teacher wellness, which
mm,
is kind of like a poppy term for, get enough sleep, and make sure that you stay hydrated and things like that. But my work takes teacher wellness to another level, in the sense that teacher wellness has to do with the being of the teacher,
mhm,
and
mhm,
that the consciousness of the teacher, and just the fact that the teacher is a standing living vibration, and it's
mhm,
actually what consciousness that the teacher brings through into the classroom,
mm,
that is what is teaching the children, and
mhm,
that is the most important aspect in the classroom, is that living vibration, and the teacher is almost a living and moving curriculum in themselves. So that's the shift, that the book brings around
mhm.
teacher education.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. It almost feels like why isn't there something out there to support teachers and their mental well-being if they're there supporting children? It's almost as if the system's gotten so much into, well, they're just here to, teach information and regurgitate information, doesn't actually matter about their health and wellness inside. It's the fact that this is even being birthed at this time makes sense. It's also like, wow, I wonder why it's taken so long.
Right. Exactly. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have a question for you because obviously you're, in the work you're doing and transformational work and having been a part of a large kind of sexuality school, but then also holding this hat as a Montessori teacher and working with second and third graders. Have you had challenges where those worlds have intersected in difficult ways? Like I imagine if a very, kind of a parent of one of the children would find out that one of their school teachers is involved in the sexuality field. I mean, I celebrate it, of course, because that you're bringing in a lot of consciousness and awareness. But have you had challenges where like people have looked at the things you're doing outside the classroom, and what's your take on that as well? Because I imagine there isn't a lot of like conscious sexuality conversation in the Montessori school. Maybe there is, but it feels like in general, that's not something I can imagine. So I'd love to hear some of your take on this as well.
For sure, and it's a great question, and probably 7 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to answer it because it's been a living and moving integration of my own.
Hmm. Hmm.
Really, I think, I'll start with and then I'll go into my journey, but I'll start with and this is, a new book concept that's coming through, is the concept of like living an erotic life, because one of the pieces of feedback that I've received from the book is the only regret is that most women won't, or people won't get this book because it's geared towards Montessori teachers. But the piece around the erotic and eros and bringing that has to do with life and life force. And one of the aspects of teachers, like I said, when we're inundated with curriculum and topics and things that we're supposed to share, right, and things that we're supposed to teach, you lose the life force. Like
Hmm.
there's no recognition of life force in the teacher, and that's what my invitation is to bring back that life force and to bring back that almost kind of like erotic current into the life of the teacher. And the teacher is a whole being. The teacher does have, has an erotic life. And in the book, I begin by talking about archetypes and
Hmm.
what archetypes that teachers really play, and especially if we look at at women and the feminine, the teacher really, and teaching, there's both genders, but it's predominantly mostly women. The teaching archetype is a very good girl archetype. It's very, Virgin Mary, like showing up, not sexual because we're dealing with children. The teacher is devoted to service, and this is, where the teacher is. And in shifting that and in recognizing the whole teacher, right, we're looking more also at the, all different sides and what
Hmm.
actually is, supportive for the teacher to live and to step into their life force energy. And while eros to me doesn't always mean sexuality, it is a facet of sexuality for sure.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so for this book, it's an invitation for teachers to begin to come back to their body, to begin to come back to embodiment. It's not at all suggesting that teachers dive deep into their sexuality.
Hmm.
It's not suggesting that teachers teach sexuality. I don't teach
Hmm.
sexuality to children. That's not, and it's an important distinction to make because that's often confused with my work. I have taught sexuality to adults,
Hmm.
and I teach children. So they're two different facets. But
Hmm.
it's like, can one person hold those two realms? And those two different archetypes don't really fit, like you said. And the journey for me was through sexuality, and I don't believe it's necessarily, to fit find life force and to, to bring eros to your life, might not be through sexuality for everybody else. But for me, it began 7, 8 years ago when I stepped into sexuality through the New Paradigm Intimacy, which was the school that I ended up directing for a few years. And I stepped into that world, and it really profoundly changed my view of life. And it
Mhm.
was, I believe, and in my experience, sexuality is almost like the final frontier in, if you want to water it down, to the topic of self-development, because it's the last
Mm.
place that people go to look for themselves. And for me, it was the beginning and the opening of a whole new life
Mhm.
and a
Mhm.
whole new way of living. And so I slowly, like, and it took, and it's been named, it took a few other people to name it for me, the courage that it took for me to begin to bring these two worlds together.
Mhm.
And I would at night, feel what many women feel. Did I say too much? Did I write too much in that Elephant Journal article? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to get burned? Like, what's going to happen? And the more that I gently edged into merging real life, I would say, or my teaching life with the transformational work that I was doing, in the way that I did it in kind of like a slow and steady pace, the more I was respected in the educational community. The
Mm.
more people and other teachers came to talk to me about things, the more teachers came to ask me, the more invitations I got for speaking, the more
Mhm.
invitations I got for, doing teacher training workshops and things like that. So, and the last talk that I gave was actually a keynote to the local South Florida Montessori community. So
Mm.
it's almost as if it's really interesting, but that edging into merging those two worlds has really shifted and brought my work to light more in the field of education.
It's kind of brought some of the shadows out for people to uncover and to deal with and to name and to be present to. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, that's great. And actually, I think with your mic, you not leave it down a little bit. So
like
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's even better.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
so I have a question for this because, obviously in the worlds that we've met in around conscious sexuality and education, there's a lot of the deprogramming of shame and being more free and liberation and meeting our erotic body in safe, consensual, clear ways. And in the education framework, I look back to my sexual education I received from a small town outside of Boston. It was, there was a sex ed class, and they showed you, pictures of venereal diseases, and they showed, they gave out a couple condoms, and it was very much, I remember this feeling of like the woman herself who was teaching it was uncomfortable with it. Like it wasn't as
Right.
if she was like in this ease. So naturally, everyone that was in that class, I remember that class well, it was just like, I think if she was more comfortable with it, we may have been as well. But and I hear so many similar stories of that, of friends and people that had some type of sexuality education in whether they're private school or public school, that just totally missed the mark. For yourself as an educator, obviously you've been working with more of the, second and third grade, with the younger generation, but like where can we improve, and why is it so fucked up? Like why can't we actually bring our education around sexuality, because it's paramount. It's so important to have this, as you and I both know, but it just gets lost. And this is, I find, pretty true country to country, culture to culture, that there isn't really a healthy place of where sexuality, especially for young teenagers, where hormones are so alive and there's so much around that. And it's just like, nope, we're just going to put you at a desk and talk about, math and science and history. And it's great. I love these classes, but like, why is sexuality so fucking lost?
Right. Well, I mean, we both know that it's been something that's been, in the shadows for most of its lifetime. And part of the work that I really believe in is that sexuality is indeed a pillar of humanity's growth. And like you
Mm,
named, it's something that we are here to face. And when we look at the recent sexual scandals and how they've actually been able to stay in the light for a little bit longer, like we're actually able to kind of digest them a little bit more. And I really believe in the light of sexuality and humanity that that is everyone's responsibility, and it really
mhm,
comes down to this concept that I've been working with around sexual intelligence. And we
mhm,
have IQ, and we have EQ, and we have SQ, which is sexual intelligence.
mhm,
And sexual intelligence involves what you're naming, which is sexual literacy, which is
mm,
how do I have conversations around sexuality? How do I recognize what is my conditioning and what are the layers that have been placed on top from my family, from society, from religion that are weighing down what we call the erotic innocence of that everyone has of life, and shaming that erotic innocence. And how can we
mhm,
become comfortable in speaking about our desires and speaking about all of the things that arise, with sexuality, because it's not really a to B thing and a clear cut thing.
mhm,
And so really, I believe that the next step is, recognizing that there's a need for sexual intelligence, and there's a need, to bring these conversations to light. And I just ran a recent course. I'm running these courses called Sexual Intelligence Level 1. I have Level 2 and Level 3, but right now I'm running Level 1. And there was a woman who came in, and she specifically came in because she wanted to learn how to support her children through their sexuality,
mm,
because she recognized that she was bringing her own conditioning and her own shame to her children in
mhm,
conversation. And that's something that I see often. For me, I have two daughters, and that, my recognition and my literacy in sexuality has tremendously supported me in having multiple conversations with my children. It's not just one time like you were naming before. It's not a one-time conversation.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
a relationship with this conversation that you begin to open.
mm,
In the classroom, I often see parents will come to me and say, "Oh, my child was I picked up the computer and I saw that they were, looking on porn websites, and, I need to block everything. And what do I do?" And yes, blocking and all of those things are important, but the biggest piece is that that child is showing curiosity.
mhm,
And
mhm,
how are you meeting that curiosity? Because each child begins, and this is only my take from being more of like a parent, but like each child, begins to show their curiosity around sexuality at some point. And it's,
mhm,
how do we meet that curiosity? Do we meet it by saying, no, 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 you can't look at that, this is bad, this is wrong, and then boom, it's already in the shadows? Or do we
mhm,
say,
mhm,
you know what, I see that you're interested in this,
mm,
this is not for you to look at, because this is actually not sexuality. Porn is not sexuality. This is not for you to look at, and this is out there, and you've done nothing wrong. But
mm,
why don't we
mm,
begin to have a conversation around this, and let me show you some ways that, we can talk about it, and, feeding that curiosity. And so it's really following that impulse, of the child when it arises, and nurturing that. But you have to do, as an adult, you have to have a level of your own sexual intelligence, because you have to recognize that that part of you that's like slamming the computer shut and saying, I'm not going to talk about it, it's too young. Like you making the decision, that it's too young for your child to have that conversation, is you imposing your conditioning on that child,
mhm.
and doing a disservice.
So, yeah, really what I hear in that is it's sexual intelligence of the parents that, are really being, invited for them to deepen their relationship so that they can actually have these
Yeah.
conversations with, with their children. One of the I was doing a podcast earlier with a friend, and we were talking about this kind of similar place of how and when does this conversation come alive? Like,
Hmm.
your what are the ages of your girls?
So my girls are 9 and 13.
9 and 13. So I'm sure with a 13-year-old, there's already been some level of like curiosity, and I'd love to hear from your perspective as both an educator and a mother. How does that
Hmm.
conversation going for you? How is that evolving? Is it easeful? Like where are your strong learning points, especially maybe parents who are listening to this who are beginning to go into that realm. I mean, mine is 9 months old. I have many years, and I'm sure I'll have my own journeys with that. But I'd love to hear your perspective as a mother and an educator, with working with this sexuality conversation with your girls, especially.
Yeah, I love that question. So
Hmm.
really, it was what I shared before, which was around following the impulse.
Hmm.
So my older daughter, she was always very interested in the body, in
Hmm.
her body, in my body, in the body in general. She would spend hours like looking at anatomy books. Her favorite TV show at the time was Doc McStuffins, which was like a cartoon character, and she was like a doctor to pet animals. And so she would spend a lot of time with her stethoscope and with her box. I would always buy band-aids, and she would do checkups on her pets and put band-aids all over. And so she was very curious, and she started asking questions about her body probably when she was 5 or 6.
Oh.
And I met that curiosity with an open conversation, and
Hmm.
books. I bought books for her, and we read the books together. I would read them to her. She would ask questions, and so for her, it started with her body, and then I continued nurturing that whenever that arose. So it was a safe place for her to bring her curiosity. And fast forward, she's 13. I think it was 2 years ago. No, it was a year, no, six, seven, yeah, it was a year ago when she was in sixth grade, and she came to me and she said, "Mommy," she said, I look up on YouTube what a dildo is?" And I was like, and there was a part of me that was like a little, taken back, but I was able to receive that, and I was like, "I love that you asked that question. Thank you so much. Can we do it together?" Because
Hmm.
there's going to be some places that you look that are not going to show you the right thing, but can we do it
Hmm.
together? And she
Hmm.
said yes. And so we sat down together, and we kind of, I showed her some sites that I thought would be more appropriate for her to look at, and showed her what a dildo was, because that's something that that was a word that she heard in school, and that was something that she was interested in. My
Hmm.
younger daughter, though she's exposed to this conversation with my older daughter, she doesn't have the same interest or desire.
Hmm.
So she and I have not had the at length conversations. But she's exposed to the conversations that I have with my older daughter to a degree. So we're a sexually literate household. So it's there. It's a space there for her when she's ready to, when she has that impulse.
Hmm. Hmm. No, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well done for paving the way.
Thank you.
And I'm curious in the realms of sort of the, Montessori teachers and individuals. You're obviously have a, you're kind of bridging gaps in the world you're doing as you're bringing in this kind of you could say new way of being, or taking in more self-nourishment and awareness, and becoming more self-initiated as a teacher. Do you find that like there's able to be more healthy conversation amongst teachers around relationships, around sexuality, or do you find it still stays pretty like hidden in a way, as if it's like in the shadows of the taboos? Or do you find that there's actually a desire amongst teachers to be able to have safe place within each other to share about this and to break some of the taboos?
Yeah, that's a great question, because what I do recognize, is that in the work that I do a lot of work with teachers around working with other teacher training centers, and they'll bring me in to do be a guest facilitator and to do guest teachings and things like that. And the work that I bring there is really focused on the teacher and the being, and not so much focused on sexuality. And the work that I do around sexuality brings in a different, it brings in both men, but mostly women who are middle aged, who are kind of recognizing that, they're missing something in life. It's kind of that spark. So the teachers, and on my Instagram page, which is the Unpolished Journey, I have teachers. I do teacher posts. And I have posts that reference sexuality and sexual intelligence and the erotic life. And some teachers are beginning, and the teachers that I have worked with have said, I would like to study sexuality with you. I'm just not there yet. And that's
Mhm.
something that interests me, but I'm just not there yet. So
Mm.
there is a desire, but there is, and I spoke about this in the book when I began with the archetypes. Like there's a tremendous amount of conditioning that is on the
Mhm.
role of the teacher. And so I believe it's a point of tension. And I lived that tension myself for many years as I was forging this path of bringing these two together in my own body. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And where do you feel like for you in your own individual path right now, like where's your next edge? Where's your edge around, your sexuality or your relationship? What are you journeying with right now that's edgy and fun and evolutionary for you?
Right. Well, right now what's coming through is in the relationship world, I've been dating in a much different way. I've been single for like 4 years, and I've journeyed my abandonment wound and anxious attachment to the nth degree. And I have like been in the underworld for a long, for many years. And it was in one of my practices about a year ago that it was wild, but I was in the wound and I was in my grief, and like my soul just stood up and walked away and was like, we are not doing this anymore. And I was like, oh my, I like didn't know what to do, because I have this whole body of work around. I have a really unique approach to anxious attachment, and I have a whole body of work around it, and I have written articles about it. And it was like an identity, like I knew how to be in this pain and in this in this underworld. And then I was like, what do I do now? So that was last November. And then April, with it was more like March, end of March, but Aries, that we had like a tremendous amount of Aries energy that came through, and I was like, I'm going to date differently. And so I have a new book coming through that's called Three Men, 3 Months, and an Escort. So that there's, some juicy stuff there that I'm bringing. That's more of like a personal journey, with attachment and relationships and, love, and recognizing, how to meet each other in love, and the messiness of humans, ability to, communicate and meet each other in these places. So
Mhm.
yeah, that
Mhm.
piece is coming through. And then also a piece around, tailor another book maybe geared more towards women, that has the content that this has, but really speaks more towards women. And that's going to be I have both of those really coming through this summer. I think I'm going to spend some time after I have my time with my daughters, and that one is around a love letter to women,
Mm.
and supporting women to come back to leading an erotic life, and what that means to live an erotic life, and the aliveness there.
Mhm.
So that those are the pieces coming through, as well as running the sexual intelligence level one. I ran it once and I had a great group, and I'm going to run it again in September. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
those are the pieces
Well,
that are on my plate.
I love this, and I love this piece around the erotic life, and I'm in a
Mm.
male body in this world. You're in a female body, and I know we're both meeting the world differently, and I'd love to hear like your perspective, just obviously to be an erotic, alive, unapologetic being as in a female body is a different framework based upon our society and conditions and what that means to be, in a male body. And this is, a two-way street. Like I look at in my field, if there's a female teacher that's quite erotic and connecting with many, it's like, well, yeah, it's generally okay. If it's a male teacher these days, it's like, oh, he's an abuser, he's a rapist, he's doing this. Like for myself as a male tantra teacher in the world or working in this field, like there's a
Right.
thousand and one projections on me before I've opened my mouth. So I'd love to
Hmm.
hear for you as someone, navigating the erotic life and being a mom and being an educator, but to still be in like that erotic fire. Like what are some of the lessons you're learning? And, do you feel, especially with all of the like conflict and challenge that exists with sexuality in the news and even with all the stuff with the Epstein files. I mean, there's so much stuff and it's just like the shadows of sexuality are coming out. And to what degree do you feel you're able to own your unapologetic erotic self in the world
Mm.
as a
I,
female
l-
body?
I love that question. I love it. And it's an edge. It's one of those parts in my world that holds a lot of internal tension
Mm,
of, the part of me, that's wanting to come forward more in beauty, more in my erotic self. And it brings up, the very common wound of, am I too much? Is this too much? And do I need to, tone it down? And wow. So it's continually like an opportunity for me to meet all those wounds that arise as I show more of myself and to define like my erotic self and the erotic life. It means to live life connected to life force and connected
mhm,
to eros. And like I said before, for the listeners, eros doesn't always mean sexuality. Eros is the urge to merge. It's the
mm,
creation. It's the life force, right? It's what brings things together and separates and explodes things apart. And it's like it is the erotic. And
mm,
that can be found in flowers, that can be found in the frequency of beauty, that can be found in the way that we touch our body. And that brings up self pleasure, which is has been a huge support for me and tool in embodying my erotic self, is self touch, and
mhm,
recognizing that self touch is what activates the nervous system and supports the capacity of the nervous system to feel. And that's what we're living in the erotic life. We're living a life that feels everything and that
mhm,
can
mhm,
feel, in the sensate body, can feel to the nth degree. And how does that look to show that feeling? And how does
mm,
it look to, exhibit that? And like you said, it's edgy and there's a tremendous amount of projections that come on there. And the biggest projection, especially around sexuality, is that, like, this is a woman who has sex with a lot of people,
mm, mm,
and that's in fact not at all true, right? Because that's a common projection. And
mhm,
so it's a really, yeah, it's a dance. And it's an edgy dance, but I've recognized and given way to the understanding that part of my life, and part of my life's path is navigating these internal tensions, which are really collective tensions, and
mhm.
bringing those forward. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned self-pleasure because this to me feels like such a evolutionary piece for people to rewire a healthy relationship with with
Mm,
their sexuality. And, I think self-pleasure is often connected just to watching porn or, pushing the connection to something on the external. But I'm curious also as a mother, like, the in the womb, they say, like the fetus or the baby developing is playing with themselves. It's a very natural
right.
part of being a young boy, being a young girl. Like, how has that conversation around self pleasure? Has that come up for you as a parent, and you feel like you're able to like very easily communicate in that way with her, or with your daughters, or around self pleasure and touch? Because I feel, so much of the church condemns self pleasure, and so much of
Mm,
life condemns it, and yet it's a very thing that can actually reestablish our nervous system and bring us into a more of a rest and digest in our body. So yeah, what is your take on the education of self pleasure?
yeah. Well, I love self-pleasure and I love talking about it. It was the tool that really radically shifted my life when I stepped into sexuality. And I think to start, one of the pieces that I talk to in the course, in my sexual intelligence level one course, is the difference between self-pleasure and masturbation.
Hmm.
And masturbation, there's nothing wrong with masturbation, but masturbation is goal orientated and it is in a specific direction. You start something and you bring yourself to an arousal, and the end game is to have some sort of, you know, orgasm or pleasure release, right? And so that is masturbation. And self pleasure is again to activate eros, which has its own language and has its own current and is really the unknown. And using the tantric tools of sound, breath, movement, and touch, you can follow the sensations in your body. And like we've been talking about with the nervous system, you can actually aliven the vitality of the cells. And when you aliven the vitality of the cells through conscious awareness, through conscious self touch, that's what begins to aliven and deepen the capacity of the nervous system to live more of an erotic life,
Hmm.
is because your nervous system can feel a little bit more. And so while self pleasure could include genital touch, it could not include genital touch, it could be with your clothes on, it could be with your clothes off, you know, it's recognizing that there's two distinct paths. And one of the things that I like to suggest for my sexuality students is to have a masturbation practice, to make that a sacred practice, and to also have a self pleasure practice. And when we look at when children are born, the body immediately, it's skin to skin contact, and the body immediately goes on to, the parent or the baby goes onto the mother's chest. And that's because the sensate organ and the sensate body is most alive when children are young. That's the first foundation that forms developmentally. That's the largest organ, is the skin. And so that's the language that babies are learning, and that's what they learn through, is through their sensate body. And so we're taught, massage the baby and touch the baby and be in contact with the baby and wear the baby. And all of those things are to support the sensate body. And then all of a sudden, as we get older, it's like, no, you're too old to hug and you're too old to kiss. And then it's like, now it's like, what do I need this touch? Like,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
where do I get this touch from? Oh, I have to get this touch from somebody else now. And so then the
Hmm.
touch becomes outsourced. And really what the most beautiful piece is recognizing that you have your ability, like it is the most healing thing to learn how to touch your own body in
Hmm.
with intention. And so that's kind of where I bring the conversation with my daughter. I talk to her about what masturbation is and what an orgasm is. And then I also, you know, we're starting to talk about how to touch the body and, the exploration of the body and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's the education I think we really should have received at a young age
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um and for yourself as a somatic sexologist, and supporting people both obviously in the classroom as well as in kind of one-to-one session space, like where do you find is the gap between, you could say, in the more traditional therapy background and journey, there's a place of like keeping the psychologist outside of the, like, their personal life, outside of the conversation with the client. And
Mm.
I know for myself, like I try to share quite a bit vulnerably in my own personal journey. But in terms of your work one to one people, at what point do you feel like the sharing is too much? And at what point do you feel like it really supports, for people's journey and evolution? Because I'm tracking this sometimes in the social media realm. Like there's obviously beautiful vulnerable shares or people opening up.
Mhm.
And I wonder where vulnerability just becomes another thing that people are utilizing in order to get more clicks and likes. And there's some pretty strong
Mhm.
examples of that. But I'd love to hear your take on this because obviously we're talking about a lot of edgier and taboo subject, and we can go on it to a lot of strong degrees. Like certainly if you were to do a video about, I'm a Montessori, sex educator, there's a lot of taglines you could put that would have a lot of, you know, blow up of social media and threads. So where do you
Mhm.
feel like
Mhm.
there's a healthy line between what you're, bringing in it vulnerably and where is there too much to share?
Right. Well, I believe, I mean, you asked the question in reference to one-on-one,
Hmm.
but I believe it's kind of in general, like in the way that I work with those who come to me, whether I'm speaking to an audience, of 300 on stage versus working with a small group of teachers versus working with those who have come through to work on anxious attachment on one-on-ones. And I believe it's really involves a tremendous amount of discernment on the role of the one who's holding the space and the one who is guiding around where they are and what experiences they're looking to have validated and where they're looking to go. And
Hmm.
I believe that there is a supportive amount of vulnerability and personal shares that we can share with those who we work with, but I also feel that, again, it's a discernment as to, and this is something that I've really been working with, is like the capacity of others to receive some of the things that I recognize as true.
Mm.
And while and who I'm working with, and it even is in relationships as well, recognizing and using discernment in that sense where something that is known to me that is my own gnosis and my something that I have ingrained and through my own experience, while that might be profound and revolutionary and was quite shifting for me, that might be too much information for them, and
Mhm,
it might
mhm,
overload them and it might shift everything. So I've been really
mhm,
working on discerning my audience and discerning the capacity of who I'm speaking with, and how I can be most of service. And it really, because I service and I work with such a variety of both men and women, it really takes just that pausing and recognizing, okay, this is where we're at. This is what we're challenged with right now, and so this is where I'm going to meet them at. I don't know if that answers your
right.
question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I gotcha, I gotcha. How
yeah,
how would you define the soul?
yeah. Well, we didn't even talk about that, and that's like the premise of the book. So,
Yeah, tell me. Well, let's get there.
yeah. So I'll begin by sharing, when I first recognized a child's soul,
Mm,
and the importance of that, in my work and in my life. And I feel that I have been one who, unconsciously and consciously have been connected to my soul and my soul's path most of my life. And but it's been coming more into consciousness as I continue down my journey. But I remember it was during COVID when we had these really small classrooms, and I had a child coming to me, and I think she was in second grade, so she was 7 or 8, and she was really upset because somebody had taken her seat,
mhm,
and she had was wanted her seat back, and that's where she was working, and she was crying, and she was in tears, and it was very upsetting for her. And I remember it was at that moment that I just shifted from trying to solve the problem, because as teachers we are handed with all of these behavior strategies of how to solve problems, and essentially you want to like deal with the behavior and just kind of like get it out of the way so that you can continue on like shoveling information in these children's, minds. And so I had this moment where I just held everything back and I held space for this child and I let her cry and I let her process go through, and it was in that moment of me pausing and looking into her eyes, and I just saw her soul like
Mm,
immediately there, and it
mhm,
was
mhm,
saying to me like, please, can't you see that I'm trying to figure this out?
mm,
Like, can't
mm,
you see that I'm trying? You're going too fast. And
mm,
I'm just trying to put it all together. And it was like her
mhm,
soul
mhm,
was directly speaking to me around this piece. And I was like, oh, wow. And so I slowed down even more. And that process ended up being its own process in itself. But the takeaway that I share in the book is around how to recognize, the soul of children, and
mm,
what the soul of children are looking for and what they're needing, and how, especially as teachers of what we call early childhood, which is 0 to 8, 0 to 9,
mhm,
is when developmentally the child's ego is forming.
mm,
Um, and it's a really important phase because the ego is a very important part to function in the world. And it's my true belief that children, when they're birthed into the world, they're mostly soul. They mostly operate, and there's different levels of this, and you can kind of see and observe them, but they really operate from a level of mostly soul when they're
mhm,
born. And
mhm,
it's through this, these developmental stages from like 0 to 8 in early childhood that they learn to, the ego develops, and a little bit more of their soul kind of gets pushed to the side because we're not in a society that really accepts souls. We really accept production and egos, and like how to function in the world. And I believe that both are really, really important. So the question really comes like, how as a teacher can I see the child's soul, and how can I support both the development of the child's ego as well as the development of the child's soul? And that
mhm,
was the reason why I connected it to Montessori, because Montessori's work has to do with um, her work. I mean, she was a brilliant woman, way ahead of her time, and her work has to do with these disciplines, and the basis of her work for the young children for early childhood is sensory work. So
mhm,
it's all about water, and transferring water from like one container to the next. It's about feeling objects of different sizes. It's about feeling different textures and touch. And Montessori, unlike other alternative curriculums, actually has a curriculum. So it is a directional focused, versus like Reggio Emilia and Waldorf don't really have necessarily a set curriculum. So she
mhm,
begins with the sensory development, which is the soul. Like that's where the soul comes through, is in the nervous system. And
mm,
then she brings this piece called practical life, which is
mhm,
purpose work. And so
mm,
then you have these children who are ages 3 and 4 scrubbing tables because they are, and like washing. We have babies, baby dolls in the classroom, and there's like a baby doll where they there's a procedure, but they wash the baby, and then they wash windows, and it's like from the naked eye it's like, well, I'm not paying an expensive tuition for my child to learn how to, clean things. And it's not. It's actually, and the child becomes engrossed in this. And that's the soul work. I believe that's the soul work. The child becomes engrossed in something like washing a table or cleaning something. And that is the soul alive and doing their purposeful work, because
mm,
a soul is here to do a purpose. And so it's like, as an adult, that might look a variety of ways, but as a child, it's like, what does that look like for a child to be in their sole purpose? And for
mhm,
me, it's really when they're engrossed in the task at hand and what they're doing, and it's like their soul can't get enough. Um,
mm.
So, and in recognizing all this, the in the book I also speak to how the teacher can then connect to their own soul, and how the connecting to your own soul is really the deeper work in teaching. And I name that teaching is in fact a spiritual path, and it's a transformational path, which gives a little bit more substance and depth to the role of the teacher besides just this person who's been trained to share information. But in
Mhm.
fact, teaching is a spiritual path of transformation for self and other.
Hmm. I love it. Um, yeah, when I hear this conversation of the soul, I mean, I have the first book I wrote was called Transformation of Soul: A Poetic Guide to Freedom.
Mm,
So I've always had this connection to soul, and yet I feel like to some brains and minds, it's not necessarily something that's tangible or
right.
grabbable or
Yeah.
attainable. So there can be like almost trying to grasp clouds that are just falling away. And one of the things I heard you say, it almost when you see a child, what I would say maybe into more of a flow state, like there's
Hmm.
a turning off a bit of the conscious brain that's trying to obtain something, and really they're just in this flow state with the world around them. Then the soul is coming through more.
Hmm.
um
Yeah.
where do you feel, and that's probably the last question, like in that child growing up, like I look at my 9-month-old baby, like a lot of times I just see him in this flow state, just like playing in the
Hmm.
river, or we take him outside all the time, whether our home here in Portugal or in Bali, like he has a lot of nature around him, which we love, and loves getting dirty and playing with stones and just like really taking in the world around them. And I look at my nieces, and my niece and my nephew are in their like early 20s now, but I watched them grow, and there was this time in their life where like suddenly, through self-awareness, like that connection to the mystery and that connection
Mm,
to the fairies and the other world and all the other dimensions, suddenly it was like the door closed, and they were suddenly now a hormonal being trying to exist in the world and having all the self-reflection of people around them. Like, I'd love to hear your take on this as it pertains especially to the soul, because this is like,
mm,
as a father, I really want to do my best to support my son to both be in the world but also to be of the world, and to have that merging between the two. And I see the developmental stages that are there, and how the
hmm.
world can almost like close off that connection to the mystery and to soul.
For sure. Yeah, and
Mm,
what comes to answer that question is kind of bridging off the statement that you said before around, the soul is a very abstract concept,
mm,
and eros is a very abstract concept. Like these are not necessarily things that are concrete and tangible that we can pick up. And children, I believe, actually they are living an erotic life. They are
mm,
fully based on, receiving things through their senses. The language, depending on the level or the age of the child, has or has not been developed in order to share, what's coming through this, with the sensations, and how they can speak, to those sensations. Um, yeah, and so it is these very abstract pieces that are alive and well in children, and from the moment that they're born. And so as children, and as we grow, and as we develop into functioning humans who can, contribute to society in the way that we become self-sufficient and all of the things, there's an invitation for parents and for those around to keep the magic alive, because the
mm,
magic becomes something that is, before, was just an unconscious part of their living. Like they're living with this erotic, and they're living, with connected to their soul, because that's really what they know. But then it becomes this, invitation of how can we bring the magic in now, and how can we,
mhm,
consciously, bring magic into, into life in little ways, so that, you can keep that aliveness alive. And yeah, bridging that gap and that dance, I think is a challenge for and an invitation for, all parents as they
Mhm.
move through this. Yeah. Yeah.
My magic every day with our little one is going under the mulberry tree and picking and eating the
I
mulberries, and
love it.
he's like, I'll start to chew it, and then he just pulls my hand to his mouth, and he's like, "Feed me now." His whole
Yeah.
face is covered in purple. It's our moments together every day here.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, I love
Well,
it.
thank you,
I love it.
Elizabeth. Thank you for the work you're doing and the worlds and the bridges that you're gapping to support many in this field, especially of education, to be able to have more consciousness around their sexuality, around their, their own self-initiation. I can really feel how much your work is necessary in that
Mm.
in the area you're in, and thank you for who you are in the world. It's really beautiful to witness and to feel you, and grateful for our friendship. Is there anything you'd like to add about where people can find you, or where to go for the book, or any upcoming projects and things like that?
Well, I think I can. This is on Facebook, right? You're putting this on Facebook and Instagram. I can put the link. So I can put the link for the book there. It's on Amazon, The Initiated Teacher.
Hmm.
And then I have my Instagram, which is The Unpolished Journey. And I have a profile on Elephant Journal. You can look me up as Elizabeth Willis. I have a lot of my writings and my articles there. And my website is Dr. Elizabeth Willis. And I have the registration for Sexual Intelligence Level 1, which is a 3-week course. It's, $112. That's coming up in September. And yeah, you can just reach out to me on any Facebook or Instagram if you have any questions or anything like that. I'm happy to have conversations.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
this
Aaron.
conversation today, and
Yeah,
yeah. Thank you to
loving
all
to be
those
with you.
who tuned in. Please like, comment, subscribe wherever you're watching this, either watching it live or after the fact on any of the channels. This is Love, Sex, and Leadership, and look forward to seeing you all another time. And have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.